Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. This is episode 84, so welcome. I hope this is your 84th episode. To all of you who have listened to all 84 episodes, a hearty handshake, but not a real one, because I'm not with you right now. With me, as always, is Pastor Mike. I'll tell you what, Pastor Mike.
Do I get the handshake?
You get the hearty handshake.
I'm always interested to see how you start out these podcasts.
I like to mix it up.
Yeah.
Michael made fun of me for how I closed the last podcast, which he wasn't wrong. Like, I was like, I'm supposed to be done talking now, but I didn't say something that sounds like I'm done talking. So I'm just going to throw out something that does sound like I'm done talking, but it was still hurtful.
Yeah.
It was still, it's my one job, be the last person to talk.
It's like having a conversation with someone who never finishes their sentences.
Ooh, that's the worst.
Yeah, it is. Drives me nuts. Might be one of my pet peeves.
Joanna finishes her sentences, but she finishes them like once she started walking up the stairs facing the other way, and I can no longer hear the rest of it. And I see both the other men in the room nodding passionately, so I'm not the only one here.
Kylie will wait until I'm walking up the stairs.
That's
and then
classic.
she'll dive into it, and then she's like, "Why didn't you answer me?" I'm like,
"Yeah,
you heard me walking up the stairs."
I will give
We're
Joanna.
We're gonna have a marriage podcast today.
We'll call this Doghouse Radio, because we will all be in the doghouse after we talk about these things. I will say one of the things early in our marriage that drove me nuts is I would be watching watching a movie or playing a video game or watching sports or something that I'm like engaged in, or even reading, and she would enter the room and like just go right into what she wanted to talk about. No, like, hey, David, or, to like shift my attention from, I'm doing this. So I either need to pause it or I need to put my book down, find a place to stop reading, whatever it is. And so by the time I can hear what she is saying, because I was focused on whatever I was doing, she's like 4 sentences in and I've missed everything that she wanted to talk about. And I'm like, can you just go, give me a hey, and then pause for like 2. And she's gotten way better at it. And I'm sure all of the things I do that drive her nuts, I have not gotten better at. So I'm appreciative of that.
Yeah.
You almost started 3 different sentences and you caught yourself every time.
That's a topic for another podcast.
If you aren't watching the video podcast, go check it and watch how many times Pastor Mike goes, no, not doing it. Not
going to do it.
Michael, do you want to come over quick to the microphone? No, Michael is gesturing that Melissa does everything perfect all the time.
Yes.
And he has nothing to add to this conversation.
We need a relationship series, and then we can tell some stories and do some things on that. Yeah. Kylie and I were actually just writing a teaching earlier today for a married event, because we're recording this obviously before this is released, and I noticed because she wrote a lot of things. She tells some great stories, and I was not allowed to tell some of the stories that I want to tell. It's like, no, you can't tell that one. That doesn't make a point. Yeah, but you tell some stories about me.
Pastor Mike keeps asking if we can record these after they're released, but Michael and I keep telling him it's not going to work, Pastor Mike. We got to keep recording them before.
Once you start making fun of me, we need to move on.
I'm kind of bummed that you're like a techie, because one of the things my dad's like staff and people in the church always made fun of him for was how behind he was with technology. They would refer to him as Fred Flintstone. And even though you're slightly older than I am, but you probably are more engaged with certain areas of tech stuff than I am.
I'm not as engaged as I used to be, but yeah.
So I got nothing. I'm the one with the bad back. You have more tech stuff than I do. I got nothing. I'm the old man in this scenario.
But you can quote football stats far more than me.
Baseball stats. Baseball's the stat sport.
Okay.
Football's just, I don't know.
Well,
they just smash into each other. I think that's how that sport works. Did they play football in the Old Testament, Pastor Mike? Speaking of the Old Testament,
nice transition there.
But we're almost done with the Old Testament.
We are.
Not like for good. I'm sure one day we will talk about it again.
We'll get back to it again. So the weekend before this was released, we kind of finished up. We're going to spend 4 more weeks, but talking about
the exile
time.
Books,
but we kind of finished up with the conquering of Israel, the whole exile, and then we're going to look at a few more books. But this kind of, in one sense, brings kind of a close to our journey through the Old Testament.
And how many weeks have we gone now? Is this?
Oh, I would have to do the math.
Is it 17 weeks? 2 6-week series and now a 5? Yeah. So 17 weeks, you've been able to touch on everything in the Old Testament, right?
Everything.
We haven't left anything
We've
out.
touched every word, translated everything.
Right,
every
sentence, we've gone back to the...
walked through every genealogy.
We've gone back to the Aramaic and broken it all down. Let's talk about some important things that we haven't got to, because I assume there have to be some.
Yeah, especially since we titled this, basically stuff we didn't get to, big threads we missed.
Threads we missed. Going back to our first mini-series.
Well, and I think one of the first ones that I've wanted to touch on, but I haven't found a place for it, is just kind of how the Old Testament is put together as one complete kind of story, even though it's multiple books, and then it goes into the New Testament. We see God's masterpiece. It just is as He's inspired this to be put together. So we remember how it starts. Genesis 1 and 2. God creates us for a relationship. We reject the relationship and wanted to find it our way, and then God promises to restore us to that relationship and undo the consequences of sin. So it starts real narrowed on 2 people, right? And then it's like, so let's think of it in terms of a movie. Let's like the camera comes out. We move into the time of the flood and the Tower of Babel. So it kind of comes out to people in general. And then what's it do? It begins to narrow back down again. And God's plan isn't just a mass plan, because part of what happens there in the story arc is you're seeing, Adam and Eve sinned, but it had to zoom out to point. This wasn't just all about Adam and Eve. There is something in all of us that wants to say, we want our own way.
Sure.
And so all of us have failed. And then it zooms in and God says, I'm going to choose one family. And through that one family, bring redemption for everybody. But then he zooms in and you see how, so he chooses Abram, later known as Abraham, and God calls him out. And God gives him a covenant. We'll talk about covenants here in a minute. And yet he fails. And then we walk down through this family line, Isaac, and then Jacob, his name was Deceiver, and yet he failed. And then, especially then he has these 12 kids, and he chooses one of them, number 11, as his favorite. There's good parenting. And you have all this.
Wait, am I not supposed to pick a favorite? Oh no.
All this infighting and all these kinds of things. And you see this whole storyline and kind of the climax that connects us to the rest of the Old Testament. And then God, one of the reasons we spent more time in Genesis especially was because the threads in it connect and explain so much else. And so there's this statement at the end of Genesis where Joseph is now in Egypt. He's basically in charge of Egypt. His brothers have come. His dad is now dead, and his brothers are like, you're going to kill us now that Dad's dead. And Joseph says, it's Genesis 50, verse 20 says, as for basically what you did, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And this is this explanation and setup, this inspiration that God gave him in that moment that he thought was just zoomed in on here, but actually pans out, and we see this thread throughout the whole thing. So Adam and Eve messed up, and it was evil. And it's not that God meant it for good, but God turned it for good. And you have Noah, you've got the Tower of Babel, you have Abram's mess ups, you have, all the way down. And then we begin to fast forward and we're just reminded that God is involved. You get in the Exodus, and slavery was evil, but God turns slavery into this incredible moment of deliverance. They're in the desert without any resource, and God takes this horrible time and he shows them that he is their resource. And then you get in the time of the judges and the kings and all these people who turn their back against him, and yet there's opportunities for these miraculous moments. And everything, I can get a little carried away in this, but then you get in the exile, so they're turned away, they're away from God, they're away from Israel, and yet in the middle of this, some of the greatest promises of redemption come.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the cross. What appears to be sin's greatest triumph, God had planned to turn into his greatest victory. And then you fast forward all the way to the end, the book of Revelation, and you read in the Revelation and how awful things will be, and yet God uses this to turn everything for good. And this thread, it's an upper story thread, like we've been talking about.
Yep.
And you just cannot let go of this. You cannot miss this. And by the way, it changes your worldview. And that's why I think this matters, because so often we think that, and we are in a messed up world, and we think that, everything is going against us, and, it's like we're fighting, we're constantly pushing against the river. But in reality, the river is all going the direction God wants it to go.
Yeah.
And ultimately, even the stuff that we try and throw in there, we try to dam up the river, we try to mess up the river, we try to poison the river, everything, the flow goes in the direction God wants to go, and he turns everything. That's how powerful and amazingly good it is. He'll ultimately turn even the worst of the worst, the cross, into the moment of the greatest grace. And that's one of those threads we've got to keep in mind as we're reading through this story and connecting it all together.
What's another one? That was tracing God's involvement all the way through,
so
and God using
this
all
is just
this bad
another
for good.
repeating pattern, and you see God at work here. So let's go back to the Tower of Babel. And we could go back even to Adam and Eve, but we'll start with the Tower of Babel. Why did they, at Tower of Babel, what did they want? They wanted to make a place for themselves, right? They wanted to make a community. We're all here together, and they wanted to make a mark on the world. We're going to show that we're so great. And they tried to do that by doing what? By in their own power, getting to the status of God, of getting up to God. And God says, no, that's not how it's done. Now fast forward to the promise of Abraham. What was God's promise to Abraham? I'm going to give you a place. I'm going to give you a people. And I will make you and your family a blessing in the world. In other words, your family will make a mark on the world. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
It's God put the desire in our heart. There's a reason the Tower of Babel, they did that. It's because that's the desire in our heart. God gave us the desire to belong. He gave us a desire to build community. It's what we do. And to make a difference. We're going to talk about the authority that's God's given us. But he said, you trying to put yourself in my place is not how this works. That's not the order of things. And so what's God do with Abram? He says, I will come to you. You can't come to me. And so God, and we have this amazing moment, the path of blood that we talked about, this covenant with this. And then, you fast forward to, say, Ezekiel's vision, because there's multiple stops along the way at the end of the exile. And God gives Ezekiel this vision. He says, so what? My spirit, there's coming a day when my spirit will live with you. So anywhere you are will be you belong because I'm now with you. So he's taking the whole promise and desire to a new level. You will be my people. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do you think that would have freaked them out, considering that being in the presence of God's Spirit at that time was you're probably going to die.
Now it could be in you.
Yeah, I mean, if I live in a world where God's Spirit exists, in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle or in the temple, behind this curtain, and a priest goes in there once, that's the world we've lived in for years. That's the understanding we have of God's Spirit. And then this guy's like, hey, it's just gonna hang out with you. He's gonna next week. I'd be like, no, thank you. No,
which is why that's set up by two different visions before. First one to Isaiah. Isaiah's calling. Isaiah gets a glimpse into heaven and the seraphim and holy, holy, holy. What's his response? I'm undone. Because he had this whole thing. I'm going to die. And what happens? Nothing Isaiah does other than recognizing that he can't exist in God's presence. And God sends what? A coal from what? The altar where sin is atoned for. And cleanses him and says, now you can be holy. In other words, God says, I will pay the price from my altar to make your holiness. And then we fast forward to Ezekiel, and before this promise, he says, I will give you a new heart. I'll take the heart of stone out of you, and I'll put the heart of flesh in you. So what's he saying? He's saying, yeah, you're right. That freaking out, you're absolutely right, unless you let me do something first.
Yeah.
And God says, because of this, now what? The world will be blessed through you. The world will know that I am God because I am now in you. And then what happens in Jesus? It says, he is the Logos. And what do we get? Like in John chapter 1, the Word did what? Became flesh and came to dwell among us. The word literally there is, he came to build a tent among us. And what's he do after that? He starts the church. He builds a community, the ecclesia, the called out ones. And then what does he do? The Great Commission, he sends us to the world. And that was the Pentecost, right? That was the day of Pentecost. He sends us out to the world. And so these three threads, these three things, to have a place, a people, and to be a blessing, they're the desires that are built into us. And they go all the way back to God's invitation to Adam and Eve in the garden. And some of this goes in with the covenant of, I want to partner with you. The world, and even before sin, will be blessed through you. And he builds this garden that is a place of relationship. This is a place for you so that what? So that you can be in relationship with me. And he says, go and multiply and build communities. This is hardwired into us.
Yeah.
And yet we keep trying to do it the wrong way. And so there's this repeating thread that, and you can see it. These are upper story things you chase down.
You said we talk about covenants in a little bit too. Let's talk about covenants.
Okay. So, we talk a lot about having a personal relationship with God, and there's all kinds of images that the Bible uses about a relationship with God. Friendship, and God is our Father, so there's this family. The one thing we don't talk a ton about is partnership. And yet that's how it started, and I just referred to it. Adam and Eve were created, and God says, invites them to be in partnership with him, to have authority over, creative authority, leadership authority over this world. And we didn't want to partner, we wanted to lead. And that's what happened. And as the Bible moves forward, you see this persistent failure of people makes it clear that we can't just blame Adam and Eve. We talked about that already. So
It's way easier to just blame Adam and Eve.
So God selected this smaller group, Abram's family, and he makes a covenant. And it's the beginning of 4 covenants in the Old Testament. And we've talked about some of them, but I want to kind of back off and look at them. So Noah, it starts with Noah after the flood. And he says what? I will not destroy the world because of sin this way again. And so God says, I'm going to be faithful. I will stay involved no matter how bad things get. Catch this? I'm not gonna wipe you out and start over again. I will stay involved no matter how bad things get. And so that was God's side of the covenant, because the covenant is what? It's an agreement between two people. We both commit to do this, and this is the result. What was Noah's requirement? Quiz time. What was Noah's requirement?
Noah had to look at the rainbow.
Nothing.
Oh.
Nothing. God required nothing of Noah. And so this is the foundation, is God saying, I'm going to, what's our upper story truth we keep coming back to? I will stay involved, and I will come to you, and I will be faithful. And that's the foundational covenant. So that's the one that he makes with us. Then you fast forward to Abraham, and God promises, we just reviewed him. I'm going to give you a place, I'm going to make you into people, and the world will be blessed through him. And Abraham did have a responsibility in this one. It was to grow in trust with him and to train up his family to trust him. That's part of what circumcision was all about. It was a moment of reminder and teaching. And the result will be that the world will be blessed. So you went from God saying, I will be faithful. Now the next covenant he's building on that is, now here is going to, how this is going to play out. And your part is to learn to trust me. Then it zooms out to Abraham's descendants, Israel, in the desert at the base of Mount Sinai. And the covenant is no longer with a person, it's with the whole tribe. Okay? And what do they have to do this time? They have to obey his limits that will produce life. And if they do, then God will bless them, and the whole world will be blessed through him. See, there's a repeating thread. The whole world will be blessed through him.
Can I ask us only somewhat related question? Yeah. But I've been thinking about it. So we're saying they need to obey his limits that produce life, and then they'll be blessed. Do you think one of the things that continued to drive and because I think it happens to us as well, but continued to drive the Israelites to straying away from following God, to looking at these other gods or these idols and things, is because they thought that meant, like, if we follow him, we won't experience anything bad. Not, like ignoring the fact that because of Adam and Eve and all of our sin, like bad stuff, you think of even just, the pre-unified kingdom, and the Philistines are raiding them, and they're like, well, this if we're following you, like, why isn't this, this should be fine. And so then they just continue to go away. That always pops in my head when we think about these things, because God does tell them, like, you will be blessed if you follow me. But he never says you'll be blessed and experience no hardship and nothing
never
will be bad.
That.
But I feel like not only did the Israelites do that, but we do that a lot as Christians, where we're like, even just recently in my life, some things have been just going wrong, in different areas. And I'm just like, I feel like I'm doing everything right. Like, why isn't this going better? Like, why do these bad things keep happening? And even though I know that that's not, the right way to look at things, but when we read a promise like that in a covenant, that like, well, I'll bless you, and then we feel like I don't feel very blessed.
And I think that's a great lower story perspective, though, to use our three things, because part of why lower story matters, because we tend to want to almost uber spiritualize what they did, and then we transpose it to ourselves instead of saying, looking at it saying, so why am I tempted? Why do I fall sometimes? Same kind of thing. Yeah. Well, if I'm real honest with myself, because I really want, if I follow God, everything to go perfectly. But God didn't promise that. Yeah. And then we're hard on these guys. Why would they do that?
We're so hard on them.
Because they're just like us.
Yeah.
They're just like us.
Yeah.
Fourth covenant, I'm going to dive into this, is with David. So you notice what happens. It's kind of a zoom out. So it's with Noah, but with all of the future people. Then it zooms into Abraham, then zoom out to Israel, and now it zooms into David again. And David is the leader of this tribe. Right, at this point in time. And God invites David and his descendants to partner with him. So all of these are about partnership by giving him leadership, and he gives them leadership. In other words, they would become the first to put learning to trust God on display to the world. And God promises him that one day one of David's descendants will come and extend the kingdom to the rest of the world. See the repeating phrase? And the world will be blessed. And David's responsibility was to follow him and grow in trust with him. But what's interesting is every one of these people breaks the covenant except God.
Did Noah break it? He didn't have to do anything.
He didn't have to do anything, but Noah, Noah, even post-flood, was not a great guy, And the prophets promised a day, and this is where I want to fast forward and connect, promised a day when the covenants would be restored, even though we've broken them. And God would do another covenant where he would make it possible for us to not break them anymore. Because, and I think your point was perfect, part of the realization is, man, we break these covenants. And no matter how hard I try, I break. I break this. And of course, the prophets say Jesus is promised to be the fulfillment of all of the previous covenants. So think about this. He's part of the family of Abraham. And he would be a blessing to the whole world. So he is the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. You think about that. And everyone can be part of the family and eventually will be an eternal place with him. So all three parts of it happen through Jesus. So he's the fulfillment of that. He is the faithful Israelite who actually in his lifetime kept the covenant. He's the only one who did.
Yeah.
And the world was blessed through him. He's the king from the line of David who will be the first forever to lead us and to bring God's blessings and to do what? And to extend the kingdom. So all of the covenants, and then you connect it to Noah, he came to fulfill his own requirement of the original one. I will make a way. I'll make what is, the rainbow really it's almost a bridge. He is the bridge in this. So he's saying, I'm going to be faithful even though generation after generation after generation you have not been faithful. And the whole purpose is not just to invite us to be a friend, not just to follow his leadership. The whole purpose is to restore partnership. So we can create, so we can lead, so we can live with him. And then you fast forward to Revelation, and now we're under a new covenant, right? It's not that the old ones don't matter. He fulfilled them. He completed them.
Yeah.
So we say, well, Abraham broke it, but a descendant of Abraham fulfilled it and kept it perfectly. Well, the Israelites broke it, but one Israelite fulfilled it perfectly. But David's line broke it, but one of David's line fulfilled it perfectly. And now he invites us. And what do you get at the end? The book of Revelation is not just, I'm going to wipe everything out and clean it over. It's a picture of us being back in partnership with God. And one of the last pictures you get in Revelation is what? Is the garden. We've talked about this. It's the journey from garden to garden. And gardens in the ancient world represent relationship. And so it's not just that we're going to tend a garden for all of eternity. That sounds
my
boring.
mom would love that.
Some people would love it.
That is my mom's heaven.
But it's a word picture of being in partnership with the one who made the garden. So he's going to have work and creativity and growth and all these things, and we'll be in partnership with the God of the universe. Not God. We tried that.
Yeah.
That was the Tower of Babel. But we'll be in partnership with him. There's an order to things. We're actually going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. And I think this is one of those threads that just ties everything together.
Yeah. Not an equal partnership, right? We're not 50-50
No.
in that partnership.
No.
Just thought I'd add that qualifier.
Although it's amazing how much he wants to, how well he wants to treat us and include us.
Yeah. So not like... I'm going to pull one of your favorites here. Not like Ebenezer Scrooge in his partnership, where
exactly.
What's his partner's name?
Marley.
Yeah, not a Marley and Ebenezer type partnership. We'll avoid those. Look, you're welcome. I brought a Christmas reference out of Christmas season just for you, Pastor Mike. Yeah. That's my gift to Pastor Mike this week. I hope all of you enjoyed it as well. Our homework continues to be to keep reading, continue on. The story. Make sure you're joining us on the weekends because our new series is coming up, like we've been talking about, where we're going to focus on the exile, some of the stories from exile. Yep. So Daniel and Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yeah. We'll start with Daniel. Then we're going to talk about the return. So we'll spend a little bit of time in Ezra and some of the prophets like, wait for it, Malachi. That
needs to be done. New series, new jokes.
And then Esther and Nehemiah.
Yeah, that's going to be really great. So make sure you're joining us for that. If you've ever missed any of the weekend teachings, we're glad that you're here on the Grow podcast, but make sure that you check out the weekend teachings as well. This is meant to kind of go deeper and supplement those. So you can find all those on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/New Hope Here, which is where you might be watching this. So that'd be really easy. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know what you want to hear Pastor Mike talk about. We haven't had one of these in a while. We're going to add one. I would like everybody to jump in the comments. And Michael, what do we want them to talk about related to Pastor Mike this week?
Uh-oh.
Michael's got nothing.
Long pause.
Michael's got nothing. I would like you to post in the comments what if Pastor Mike had to currently join a professional sports team, what sport
That
sport
would be
would his
ugly.
best chance be? So you can go water polo, you can go underwater basket weaving, you can go professional football, whatever you
This could be
whatever you
entertaining.
pick. That's what I want in the YouTube comments this week.
Okay.
Thank you guys for being here with us. We love all of you, and we will see you next time.